Greetings, students! Welcome to the second installment of Office Hours. This is our new series that we are doing here at Miskatonic University, where you, my students, ask questions of me, your professor, and I provide you with the answers. Let us dive right in. Our first question here is from Jacob Israel. Mr. Israel, we are still very pleased with you for having shouted us out on your channel so long ago. Many of you found your way here through him, and I am very grateful to you, Jacob. Mr. Israel asks, the Ouroboros is a symbol that is prevalent today. Are we in a time loop? And if so, can we escape it? The Ouroboros, for my students who may be unfamiliar, is an ancient Egyptian symbol. The picture of the Ouroboros is the snake eating its own tail. This has been interpreted often through Egyptian, Greek, Roman, and so forth into the modern day as being a symbol of eternity. This is because if the snake bites its own tail, it may continue to go round and round until it eventually, never ends. This symbolic reading of eternity is the premise on which Mr. Israel's question lies. Hence, are we stuck in a time loop? I think that it is a wise observation that the Ouroboros is an important symbol for our modern era. However, I would differ in my symbolic reading of what it means. As I was researching this question, I came across several instances of the Ouroboros, but many of them were consigned to antiquity. You know, Petrarch, Cleopatra, these sorts of people are talking about the Ouroboros. With the coming of the Christian church and the religious developments since then, mentions of the Ouroboros have fallen steeply off. That is why I found it so surprising to find a detailed vision of the Ouroboros appear in the notes of a German chemist. This man was Mr. Auguste Kekulé, who in the mid-19th century describes the snake biting its own tail appearing to him as he begins to doze off after a long day of trying to determine the atomic structure of a particular chemical, one called benzene. Benzene is a chemical that is, the chemical formula for it is C6H6. That is, it has 6 atoms of carbon and 6 atoms of hydrogen. This was well known from the beginning of the 1800s, but for decades the question persisted, how exactly are all of these 12 atoms arranged with each other? There are, of course, many different ways that this could be, and understanding the structure could give some insights into how the chemical might be further exploited. This was eventually discovered by Mr. Auguste Kekulé after he had this vision of the Ouroboros. He saw the snake biting its own tail, and he saw in this a ring of carbon atoms, around which jutted a larger ring of hydrogen atoms. This revelation led to further petrochemical analysis, which is very prevalent today in the form of gasoline. Benzene is, in fact, one of the 5 or 6 most prevalent chemicals inside gasoline. And I find it very interesting that it was the Ouroboros who revealed the details of this chemical to us, because gasoline now rings the world round, as the Ouroboros was said to do in Egyptian mythology. Moreover, as I said, the stock of the Ouroboros, as it were, went into a large dip whenever Christianity became the lingua franca of religion in the European sphere. This is important because benzene is not exclusive to petrochemicals, but is in fact also derived from a material called benzoin gum. And benzoin gum is also a chemical that has quite broad use in church incense. The aromatic qualities of benzene are then present in the incenses that surround the holy altars of the Christian faith, and 2, the pungent odor of the gasoline machine. Indeed, benzene is the most aromatic chemical involved in gasoline construction, and the fact that it is such a typical part of 21st century experience suggests to me that perhaps the Ouroboros is tightening its hold round the globe in a way that the Catholic Church was able to do during the Age of Discovery. I think that this is an important point to bring in, that symbols can be at various times beneficent or maleficent. And in this case, we have the symbol of the Ouroboros being interpreted as one of eternity in the case of the Catholic Church's benzo and gum incense. However, whenever we consider the use of petrochemicals and the widespread apocalyptic effect that they have on the environment, we might realize that the serpent eating its own tail is also involved in a catastrophic self-consumption. I think that this shift in the meaning of the Ouroboros has more to do with our current moment than does the notion of being stuck inside an eternal loop of time. And it is vital that we find a new out, as it were, from this destructive cycle that the Ouroboros has heralded in our modern age. Thank you again, Mr. Israel, for your question and for your continued patronage of this channel. Moving on.
You okay there, Professor?
Yes, I have it, thank you. Farm Diesel asks, do you think that you will ever address the lie of a globe Earth? And I have mostly selected this question in order to praise the reply of my student out there, Ira Onak, whose reply I think is excellent. Ira replies, didn't they? Existence is thought to be two dimensions projected into a third, resolving an excess of localized energy in space-time by folding out through a new dimension. Flat Earth is, therefore, very real, though not necessarily mutually exclusive to a globe. I think that this application of the subject of our study last time is absolutely phenomenal. Ira Onak, I am giving you an A+ for the day. And we'll now move on to your question. Farm Diesel, I may choose to address your question at a later time, but I hope that you will engage with Ira in his excellent analysis. Ira's question. Professor, do you believe consciousness arises from sufficiently complex matter or inhabits it? This is a very interesting question, Ira, and one that I spend much time thinking about in my own researches and philosophical reveries. I believe that it is very important first to defer to the experts, and there's a book on this topic that I would very much like to recommend called I Am a Strange Loop by Douglas Hofstadter, a bit of a sequel to his book Gödel, Escher, Bach, for which he won some sort of very important award. I think it was a Pulitzer in the 1983 or so. In any case, to answer your question, I think that these are both strange verbs to ascribe to consciousness. Arises out of, or what was the other word? Inhabits. I tend more towards inhabits, I suppose. I think that the important word here is actually uses. It is very significant that we never actually witness consciousness rising out of matter, nor do we witness consciousness departing matter, as it were. But we do see it come into possession of matter. For example, whenever we wake from sleep. The important implied question here, I feel, regards the persistence of consciousness despite matter, really at the crux of the issue here. And we cannot know this thing without its context. I believe that language is actually quite capable of being abused in this way. Just because we are capable of phrasing a question in the English language does not necessarily mean that that question itself has meaning. This is the foundation of a genre of story, as far as I understand it in any case, and I'm certainly no expert, known as the Zen koan. We are not necessarily able with our minds to plumb every construction that the language is capable of expressing. It is one of the mysteries of language that in certain ways it excludes us. In his book, Gödel, Escher, Bach, Mr. Hofstadter describes us as that the process of reflecting on ourselves, trying to use language to ask questions about consciousness, since language is in a way made up of consciousness, is, I keep calling it an abuse, and I do not mean for that to carry with it some sort of negative connotation. I think that it is an important and interesting practice, and one that often leads us to new revelations, but I do not think that it is a process which is conclusion or answer oriented. And I think that this is an important way to approach questions like this, to sit with them, to let them resonate inside, but not to stress over the lack of a solution. Let us move on to our next question now. Ira, thank you very much for both your question and your engagement with the other students. Super Mario then asks, where do UFOs come from? Unidentified flying object is such an impossibly large category that it is impossible, I think, to actually say where all UFOs come from, since they are likely to come from many different sources. I will mention, however, that I've always been a very big fan of the notion that UFOs come from the ocean, or perhaps the Arctic. However, I would like to point out one thing about the phrase UFO and a hint that it might give us, and that is the very phrase UFO stands for
unidentified flying object, Professor.
Thank you very much. The very phrase UFO stands for unidentified flying object. I think that it is important to note how ufologists have latched on to this three-lettered abbreviation, UFO, as opposed to the more intuitive or descriptive flying saucers or spaceships. Perhaps this is to avoid too narrow a category for this phenomenon, but I think that we can read something else into it. And this is the fact that unidentified flying object is not a category of object so much as it is a perceptual category. Anything that is unidentified fits within the UFO purview. The fact that it is a perceptual category suggests to me that perhaps it is within the realm of perception that we must look for these objects. Unidentified flying objects, I think, are more likely to show up, as Charles Fort has suggested, in the places that previous generations found fairies, ghosts, and the like. The next question that I would like to address here is one submitted by Lindsay M. Lindsay asks, do you think CERN could be the cause of the Mandela effect? I found this question baffling at first. I did not imagine what CERN might have to do with the Mandela effect. However, by researching more into the current thinking around the Mandela effect, I have noticed that many people feel that the Mandela effect may be related to some sort of multiple realities situation. I personally do not find multiple realities to be a convincing answer for the Mandela effect. This is because, to me, if there's going to be another reality that we slide into, it is going to be either insignificantly different or absolutely fabulously different. It is not going to be different in some subtle way that looks like a group of different memories taking place. However, I do think that it has an interesting link to the theory that reality is a simulation. According to an article in Quantum magazine called Imaginary Numbers May Be Essential for Describing Reality. Imaginary numbers may be essential for describing reality. It looks like, according to the most recent scientific advances, numbers with an I on the end, that is, numbers which, multiplied by themselves, result in a negative number, may actually be essential components of certain physical processes. This was a surprise to the physicists who had, before this revelation, believed that imaginary numbers were purely the realm of mathematics. I find this interesting within the context of reality being a simulation, because simulations happen in a computerized space where imaginary numbers might have significant impacts. This suggests to me that it is more likely that reality is in fact a simulation. And in that case, perhaps our deep investigation into the fundamental physics, into the fundamental particles that CERN is carrying out, may in fact have a great deal to do with that simulation. As we were discussing earlier in this very episode, whenever a being starts to perceive itself, strange things start to happen and consciousness may arise. I believe that by CERN investigating and getting to the bottom of the quote-unquote coding of the universe, it may be creating some of these weird effects, such as the Mandela effect, such as memories changing and reality shifting a little bit under our noses, particularly in the perceptual sphere in which these weirdnesses are most likely to occur. There is one other detail I found regarding CERN, which I found very concerning, if you will. And that is this, that in 2017, they christened a new laboratory in the Middle East called Sesame. What Sesame stands for, I couldn't tell you, because it is an extremely long and complicated phrase, but the gist of it is that it is a place for the Middle East to do fundamental particle physics. In Alibaba and the 40 Thieves, Open Sesame is a phrase used to access a secret cave of wonders in which strange delights are found by the thieves. However, I would remind the scientists at CERN, if their idea is to open some portal into some place where they might profit, that those thieves died trapped in that cave. And I hope that they do not open up anything which we might tumble into. Our next question from Spells of Truth reads, I've recently researched if staring at the sun can cause blindness. Turns out there's not one confirmed case of someone going blind after staring at the sun with the naked eye. This begs the question, what happens when you stare at the sun for an hour while barefoot and in nature? What are you, a plant? This is what plants do. Are you trying to trick me, Spells of Truth? I will not stare into the sun. I have had enough time seeing things as it is. These glasses are very thick.
With your glasses, Professor, your eyes could light on fire, you know? Because sometimes if the light goes through a glass, you know how kids burn bugs like that?
Yes, that's true. It
You
could
know,
be very
this person
dangerous.
could be trying to kill you.
Spells of Truth. Watch it. Moving right along. This is not, in fact, a question, nor do I have an answer for it, but I did want to read this out. Angela Maria Samwaya observes, Zoom, zoom, zoom ma zoom. Zoom was a children's show in the 70s, full of programming triggers. Oz, Land of Oz, Australia. I just wanted to take a moment to praise this comment, for I believe that this is exactly what I hope for you, my students, to be doing. Carrying on the researches and adding details of your own as we continue to investigate these things. I did follow up on these somewhat over the past week, and I will continue to look into these. I find this Zoom television show to be very interesting and, frankly, very suspicious. Thank you for pointing this out and sending me down this rabbit trail. I hope to have more to report on this particular thing in some future episode. Angela? A+. Alright, our final question of the evening. Algorithm asks, question, is not being concerned with the outcome of anything the most accurate way to inhabit this realm? Excellent question. Algorithm, I would like to, I believe the phrase is, shout you out for the way that you have been engaging so consistently with the channel over time. It has not escaped my notice, and I do appreciate it. I find accuracy to be a very charming word in this context. The expected word, I suppose, would be something like genuine. One wants to inhabit this realm in a positive, useful, good way. And doing so accurately is a fascinating concept. We might say that we are living accurately if we are engaging with the world as it is, and not the world as we imagine it to be. And I think that this is indeed a positive goal. But the negative phrasing of your question also has me worried. It is phrased not being attached to the outcome of anything, which I feel like is is a type of attachment in and of itself, because you're living in a hypothetical future, which is easy for us persons of the mind to do. Instead, I would say, instead of not being concerned with the outcome of anything, I would say perhaps focusing on the present moment, focusing on present sensation and present feeling. That seems to me a very accurate way to live in this realm, because we are living in this one and not a hypothetical one that we have projected out onto it. Thank you again, Algo, for your question. Thank you so much for joining us, oh my students, for this, the second ever office hours. Thank you especially to our patrons on Patreon, who make this all possible and profitable. If you would like to join them on Patreon, you can join now for access to expanded essays on the topics we discuss here, additional graphics, and early releases of our videos. We will be posting there in 1 week's time a new grand conspiracy, which will follow several days later on the YouTube. So get over there if you would like the additional content. If you would like to ask a question to be answered on this office hours, please ask it either here on the comments for this video, or on Twitter or Instagram, or on the Patreon. Priority will be given to the questions asked by the students on Patreon, so go over there if you have something burning deep inside you. Until next time, may you bask in the sun of wisdom, just like our reptile overlord.